Hawaii is way out there, 2,300 miles into the Pacific Ocean from the continental U.S. But 1,300 miles past the state is an American island cluster nearly unknown outside of one battle in World War II. Midway Atoll is a ring of small volcanic islands that barely stick above the Pacific Ocean. The largest island is less than 2 square miles, and all combined are less than 2.5, about a tenth the size of Manhattan. Despite its small size and extreme remoteness, Midway has a long and storied history, the remnants of which now rot among wildlife on the abandoned island. Join me as I venture through the history of Midway Atoll. Midway Atoll, sometimes referred to as Midway Island, was discovered in 1859 by sealers and was claimed for the United States in 1867, becoming the first Pacific island in U.S. territory. Unlike Hawaii, there were no indigenous inhabitants of the atoll, and it wasn't permanently occupied until 1903. Although it's best known as a military base, it was first permanently inhabited by workers of the Commercial Pacific Cable Company, who were working on a trans-Pacific communication cable. In 1908, Roosevelt stationed a few dozen Marines to protect the island and the company's infrastructure from Japanese poachers and squatters after numerous run-ins. The poachers were after seals that nested on the shores of the island, but Midway was most notably inhabited by thousands of albatrosses, large seabirds that live nearly entirely in the northwestern islands of the Hawaiian archipelago. From the beginning, the albatrosses became a symbol of Midway Island. In 1935, Midway became a regular stop for airplanes. Not military planes, but rather M-130 flying boats operated by the now-defunct Pan Am Airlines. The flying range of planes at this time was not enough to cross the Pacific, and Midway Atoll provided one of the many necessary stops to complete the route from San Francisco to China. At the time, this was the fastest commercial crossing of the Pacific. Pan Am constructed a luxury hotel on the island, formerly called the Pan Am Hotel, but nicknamed the Gooneeville Lodge after the albatross birds that crowded the island. As aircraft technology developed and planes could fly further distances, the entire commercial infrastructure of Midway became obsolete. It was torn down in 1957, having been around for just 22 years. As World War II ramped up and the U.S. became increasingly wary of Japan, American leaders began to look to the island for its defense potential. It is about midway, hence the name, from the west coast of the U.S. to Tokyo, 700 miles closer to Tokyo. Already a refueling stop for Navy and commercial aircraft alike, the islands were quickly militarized by an executive order under FDR. Airstrips were built along with a seaplane base and a myriad of support buildings, and anti-aircraft guns were installed along the edges of the islands. The Navy also restricted airspace around the base. The first attack on Midway came December 7, 1941, the same day as the much more publicized attack on Pearl Harbor. 2 months later, the island was bombarded by a Japanese submarine. Midway is best known, however, for the battle bearing its name, the Battle of Midway. On June 4, 1942, 6 months after the Pearl Harbor Day attack and 4 months after the submarine bombardment, a Japanese Imperial Navy fleet staged an attack on American vessels in the Pacific. Despite launching the attack, the Japanese Imperial fleet was quickly overrun by American forces. American cryptologists had partially decoded the Japanese's plan of attack, and surveillance planes had spotted the encroaching fleet the day before. 307 Americans were killed, about 1/10 of the Japanese loss. This was the first battle won by the Americans and was a devastating blow to the Japanese and an instrumental event in the downfall of Japan's control of the Pacific. Perhaps the greatest construction feat of Naval Air Station Midway was the enlarging of Sand Island after the Battle of Midway to over twice its natural size, allowing a second airfield to be built. The Navy kept people stationed here for the duration of the war, and the Naval Air Station was decommissioned 6 years later in 1950. Its decommissioning lasted less than a year as Midway became a support island for American forces in the Korean War. The population of the island during this era swelled to over 3,000 inhabitants. After World War II and throughout the Cold War, the island also served as a base for surveillance submarines. In 1978, with the threat of war decreasing and the introduction of satellites and military surveillance, Midway was downgraded to a naval air station. It closed for good in 1993 after the Cold War ended, a time at which less than 20 people remained on the island. In 1996, Bill Clinton transferred control of the island to the Department of the Interior via executive order. Although public access was greatly limited, the Navy went through exhaustive efforts to mitigate the environmental damage they had done to the island. In 2000, Aloha Airlines began offering weekly service from Honolulu to Henderson Field, the civilian remnant of the Naval Air Station. There was at this point some ecotourism on the atoll, including a 100-person eco-village resort and 150 workers stationed just for the airport. Aloha suspended service in 2002 after a dispute with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Midway Airport was closed for regular service in 2008 when the management company couldn't come to an agreement either. There was never a huge demand for tourist amenities on the island, and in fact the airlines had operated at a loss for years. Despite its white sand beaches and crystal clear water, Midway is remote and lacks the scenery of Hawaii. Its peak tourism era was in the 1930s when the Pan Am Hotel was in operation. Island wildlife today faces a challenge too: plastic. About 100 pounds of debris from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch wash up on Midway's shores every single week. Often small and particulate, this plastic poses a threat to numerous species living on and around the island, including the signature albatrosses, whose organs can clog from plastic debris. Today there is no tourist access to the island, but about 40 people still live here on a rotational basis. These people include Fish and Wildlife Service employees, contractors, and volunteers. As of the 2010 census, there are no people here who qualify as residents. It is one of my lifetime goals to visit Midway Atoll, but given all the hoops to jump through, for now I'll just have to rely on pictures and Google Maps, a small glimpse into the decrepit wildland of Midway Atoll. I have to give a shout out in this video to Forrest and Kim Starr, a husband and wife environmental consultant team. Over the years, they've provided some of the best photos of Midway Island and its abandonment. I've linked to their website in the description of this video.